The arrest of Tunisian opposition leader Rached Ghannouchi has led to a wave of criticism aimed at the current president, Kais Saied. He's accused of a widespread crackdown on opposition views in the country. So what is happening in Tunisia, a place that had been called the Arab Spring's only success story? Welcome to Roundtable. I'm Philip Hampshire. Former law professor Kais Saied was seen as a surprise election winner when he became the president of Tunisia in 2019. Within 2 years, he'd suspended parliament, and since February, around 20 opposition leaders, dissidents, activists, and journalists have all reportedly been arrested. During the holy month of Ramadan this year, dozens of Tunisian policemen swooped on the home of Ennahda party leader, 81-year-old Rached Ghannouchi. He was charged with plotting against state security, found guilty of incitement, and then sentenced to a year in prison. So what is the state of democracy in Tunisia? So let's meet our guests. Joining us from Tunis, we have Dr. Eli Abouan, who's a visiting lecturer at St. Joseph University in Lebanon. Also in Tunis, we have Rached Ghannouchi, who is a former director of the Tunisian Institute of Strategic Studies and a writer on Tunisian politics. Meanwhile, from London, we have Dr. Rached Ghannouchi, who is an academic and Rached Ghannouchi's daughter, the leader of the opposition Ennahda party, who is currently in jail. So let me start off, if I can, Eli, with you. In 2019, Kais Saied won the election with a very populist style of campaigning. He was usually regarded as a little bit stiff and going out in his suit, but nonetheless, he was out on the streets and he was shaking hands with street vendors and he was meeting people in cafes and all of that kind of thing, and he won the election relatively convincingly. Once you fast forward through, though, to 2021, having gained power by legitimate means, he then used Article 80 of the Tunisian constitution to say that there was sort of a state of emergency and had what academics generally call a self-coup, a coup to maintain himself in power. And now, of course, he's continued remaining in his position of power. What on earth is going on in Tunisia? How has this slide occurred?
Well, thank you very much for hosting me. I think, what is happening in Tunisia cannot be taken out of context. The whole problem dates back to pre-2019 and pre-2021, obviously. And in Tunisia in 2011, like in many parts of the MENA region, what happened in reality was not a re-revolution. There was a political change, but we did not see a social change happening at the same time. So Tunisia is a country, as I said, like many other places in the region, is a country where the majority of people don't really adhere to the principles and the values of parliamentary democracy. And the other driver of what happened after that is that the economic and social expectations of the population in Tunisia from the change in the regime were not realistic. And basically what happened is that 10 years after the revolution, the Tunisians were disappointed by the fact that their living conditions did not improve, their economic situation did not improve. And obviously, the easiest way to handle this was to blame the political elite that ruled the country between 2011 and 2021. So when Kais Saied was elected in 2019, he came from this mindset that blamed the politicians, the political elite, and he built his campaign in 2019 and post-2019 on this premise that it's the mistake of the political elite, and therefore we need to change this political elite and the political practice and start something new, what he called and his entourage calls a corrective course of democracy. So Kais Saied is not, at least in his public statements, is not, saying that the democratic model is not valid for Tunisia, just saying that this model has to be adapted to the Tunisian context.
Direct.
Now,
Hold on, let me take this across to Tarek and introduce everyone on the panel. Tarek, do you agree with that? Do you think that's a reasonable summation of the current position that Tunisia finds itself in?
Yes, I would agree with a large part of that. Populism that came to power in 2019 was not just coming out from a void. After the revolution in 2011, we can say there is a post-revolutionary populist context. Even what's going to be described as a political elite, as the post-revolutionary elite later, was basically using populist discourse, was basically saying that the former elite of Ben Ali was the problem and they're the voice of the people. The people want. Sha'bu yurid. That's something that was repeated by much of the political elite after the revolution in 2011. That is the revolt that happened in Tunisia at that time. And it's not only Kais Saied. Kais Saied is only one of the populist candidates who were very vibrant in 2019. I can say that more than 50% of the votes in the presidential elections went to populist candidates. And this is not happening because someone is blaming. Here, I might disagree a little bit with Eli, is that also because the political elite did not deliver. That's the problem. The political elite before 2019, in 2011, 2014, after the 2018 elections and the municipal elections, they did not deliver economic, social reforms because that's what was demanded by much of the Tunisian population and those who went to the streets in 2011 in the first place. And much of the focus of the political elite was basically political bargaining, political positioning. This is part of democratic transition. That's certain.
Hold on there, Tariq. Let me come back to that in a second. Let me take this across to Yusra. Yusra, your father currently is in jail in Tunisia, is that correct?
That's correct. He has been in jail.
You have a slightly stronger view on this than the other two gentlemen.
I agree, of course, that there has been disappointment in what was achieved since the revolution. That's understandable. Everyone recognizes that. And it is that disappointment that was exploited by Kais Saied since coming to power in 2019 not to address that disappointment or the problems, but to exacerbate the problems, to obstruct the work of the government, the work of parliament, in order to lay the ground for his coup against Tunisia's democracy. But the disappointment and the results that are definitely less than people's aspirations and expectations should not make us deny the great progress that was made. Tunisia, in fact, was recognized in 2018 as being on track to be one of the fastest transitions from dictatorship to democracy in terms of many governance indicators, in terms of building democratic institutions and independent judiciary, freedom of the press, and a progressive constitution, and inclusive political climate, successive free and fair elections. All this should not be forgotten. We understand and we definitely recognize that people's aspirations in terms of jobs and prosperity were not met. But Kais Saied, after promising that he will get rid of all the problems of parliament and democracy and political parties, that he will address these problems, has only led to the exacerbation of these economic problems and the near bankruptcy of the economy in Tunisia, because he has no solutions to offer. His only project is to amass powers, to rewrite the constitution, to establish his own parliament without addressing the real issues that Tunisians care about.
Eli, if I bring this back across to you, we just heard from Yusra there about the hope that there was in the West for Tunisia, that Tunisia was perhaps the most democratic and certainly heading on for being one of the more stable countries in North Africa. Back in 2015, there was a Nobel Prize that was awarded to the quartet out of Tunisia because of the hope and the optimism for what the country could do, be, and achieve. So what do you think went wrong?
I think basically what happened in 2013 and the Nobel Prize, so the national dialogue that was led by the quartet, which basically motivated or justified the Nobel Prize award, is a great achievement. I think that Tunisia back then was on the brink of a civil war, and it was specifically the role of these four elements or institutions that prevented the civil war from ravaging in Tunisia. So I definitely see the value and the merit, and I do agree that there was some progress on the political side between 2011 and 2021, but I wouldn't go as far as saying that it was a democracy. I don't think that the democratic practices between 2011 and 2021 were sound and they were not flawed. They were actually flawed. And we've seen how the judiciary was instrumentalized on multiple occasions between 2011 and 2021. We've seen some restrictions on media and journalists. They didn't go as far as putting people in jail, but there were restrictions back then. So some of the issues that everyone is complaining about today existed pre-2021. And the second thing I want to say is that no government, neither the ones that ruled the country between 2011 and 2021, nor the one that is ruling the country now, will be able to make any progress on the economic and social side as long as they continue to do it top down. The economic reforms in Tunisia that would allow more prosperity and more equity require a new social contract, a new economic model that is completely different than the one that we have today in Tunisia. This includes obviously revisiting the role of the unions, because the unions have an oversized role in the economic life of Tunisia. This means that the whole concept of the welfare state has to be reversed, subsidies, etc., etc. All of this requires a very large buy-in from the population, and there were no efforts to secure this buy-in so far. So far, we've seen governments coming with nice plans, written by very competent experts, and parachuted on the population, saying, "Okay, this is what we need to do. This is what we're negotiating with IMF, etc., etc." This will never work. No government, neither the previous ones nor this one, will be able to get Tunisia to a path of recovery and prosperity if they don't work a bottom-up approach to economic reforms and social reforms.
Tarek, I assume you're in agreement on that or not?
Well, this is a problem of methodology. I think the problem is not only of methodology, bottom-up or top-down. Let me go back, first of all, to the issue of democratic progress. Democratic progress is not measured by some indicators set by some NGO somewhere. It's basically tested by the popular participation and popular reaction and popular involvement. And what happened throughout the years, especially in 2019 with the high vote for populism, it was an early sign that there was a problem. The problem, and this is just to interact with Yusra, is that after 2019, after that clear warning, basically the post-revolutionary political elite, including the main Islamist party, which is still at that time the leading party, did not take that into account. And they continued with the same basically political maneuvers, having a parliamentarian alliance that is separate from the government alliance, which never happened. I mean, it's very unique to Tunisia. It shows you how much the democratic process was really unusual and somehow alien to what should happen between politics and economics. Going back to what Ali said, it's not only a problem of methodology. So what kind of a project, what should be reformed, what do we mean by reforms, is the major problem. There is going to be a conflict by the end. You're not going to have everyone agreeing about changing the status quo. There is a structural problem that was the origin why we had a revolution in the first place. There is a rentier economy. There is an economic elite that was serving the dictatorship, and they adapted to the post-revolutionary democratic transition, and they were never touched, and they kept their interest and their rule over the economy. And you're not going to find an agreement about how we should do reforms. There has to be a clear line of reforms, and whoever in power should push for that. Without
hold on a second, because I've got to bounce it around between different people. But you mentioned there it shouldn't be a checkbox exercise with certain NGOs from around the world. I have here a quote from one of those said NGOs. This is Amnesty International. This is Rached, who is Amnesty International's acting deputy director for the Middle East and North Africa. And here's what they had to say. Tunisian authorities are increasingly using repressive, vaguely worded laws as a pretext for repression to arrest, to investigate, and in some cases prosecute dissidents and opposition figures. The sentencing of Rached Ghannouchi shows a growing crackdown on human rights and opposition and a deeply worrying pattern. Yusra, I'm assuming you're going to be in agreement with that.
Definitely, this is the problem. I mean, I agree and disagree with what was said previously. I agree it was not a perfect democracy, but to equate what was happening since the revolution, you know, the decade after the revolution, and what's happening since the coup is deeply unfair. The fact that there might have been some restrictions in the media does not equate with the fact that Tunisia has lost more than 40, in its ranking in the World Press Freedom Index, and in terms of the independence of the judiciary, etc. What we see, as testified by various NGOs, by experts in Tunisia, by judges, journalists, almost all political parties in Tunisia, unions, civil society organizations, is that we are now facing a coup against Tunisia's democracy, however imperfect it was, and that those who are trying to oppose the coup, trying to unite the ranks of the opposition, trying to put forward an alternative in order to deal with the socioeconomic problems that you have rightly emphasized, those are being scapegoated, they're being arrested, fabricated charges are mounted against them. And this is what will obstruct anything happening. You rightly praised also the national dialogue of 2013. This is what everybody is calling for. The unions are calling for that, political parties are calling for that. But Kais Saied is not listening to any of these calls. And he's continuing on his project of amassing infinite powers and not paying any attention to the really urgent problems that Tunisia is facing.
Ellie, I saw you nodding there. I've been to Tunisia, reported from different parts of the country. In my experience, the Arab Spring, the immediate aftermath to the Arab Spring, one of the complaints of the people that I spoke to was that certain parts of the country and certain tribal groups or clan groups within the country were treated preferentially by the main government in Tunis over other regions. Is that still going on? Do you think that that is a realistic problem, or do you think that that's changed now?
Okay, first of all, I would like to clarify that I was not trying to equate between what was happening between 2011, 2021 and what's happening now. I think that, I'm not one of the people who are trying to underestimate the gravity of the situation today. Certain practices are really worrisome. What I was trying to say is that these practices are a continuity, although the intensity may be different, but there is a pattern of practices, of similar practices that we've seen since 2011. So it's not an analogy that I'm trying to make here. I'm just stating that there is a pattern of this with a different intensity, I admit. And honestly, I do think, and this is something I share with some of my Tunisian friends, is that these practices do not serve the project of the president himself. So I think, the president and his team would benefit from revisiting some of these practices. Now, back to your question, yes, I mean, there is a clear regional disparity in Tunisia that is a legacy of the past. It's not something new. Honestly, there is a narrative that is even stronger than the reality about how the coastal side of Tunisia was treated with a lot of privileges and preference compared to what they call here the interior side. But I have also tried to explore this issue further with some of my Tunisian friends, both in governments and outside the government. And I came to realize, actually, that there were attempts to correct this disparity. There is legislation actually encouraging investment in some parts of the country. There are incentives for investors to go there. But you go back again to the same issue, is that the economic model is not conducive to correct this disparity. So even with the best political will today, there are serious impediments to how far you can go in correcting this disparity between the coastal side or some parts of Tunisia and other parts of Tunisia. Let me put it this way.
Let me take this across Tariq now. Tariq, if you had a magic wand, if you were advising the government and they said to you, Tariq, we're in incredible trouble here, we're worried that potentially there could be another civil, societal breakdown, what do we do now to head that off? What can we do over the next 12 to 18 months to fix this? What do you do, Tariq? Do you stop taking loans from the IMF? Is that a big part of the problem because of the rigid structure there? Do you do other things?
Well, I would certainly not like to be in that position, especially with this government. But in terms of generally speaking, what we can say now is that there are needed reforms that should happen. The problem is that the pace and the kind of reforms that were negotiated between the government of Kais Saied and the IMF and were concluded in a staff-level agreement in October 15th with the IMF were rejected later by Kais Saied. The problem with Kais Saied is that he's not coherent with himself. He does not have a clear vision, and his discourses are not necessarily aligning themselves with the practice, with the actual exercise of power. As long as so he's repeating himself by refusing the dictates of the IMF, but at the same time he's sending his government to negotiate with the IMF with the same kind of conditions. Just after a week when he said that he refuses the dictates of the IMF, he sent his economy minister Samir Said to Washington, and he basically continued negotiating with the same approach. It was only yesterday that Kais Saied remembered that he should consult with economic experts. He invited them to the palace to discuss the economy. The problem with Kais Saied is not only his populism. You know, populism can be problematic, can be beneficial depending on the historical context. The problem with Kais Saied is that what he says is not necessarily what he's doing. In addition to that, of course, can we go for economic reforms without democracy, with authoritarian steps? I don't believe that we can pursue economic reforms with more authoritarian steps. Economic reforms cannot happen in a context of an authoritarian regime. The problem, on the other hand,
hold on there, because we're running out of time, Tariq. So I can take it across to Yusra. Yusra, I feel that we should ask you, how is your father doing? Is he okay and healthy while he's in jail?
My mother has been able to visit my father once. He's doing well. He's facing the same charges as dozens of political leaders, judges, journalists who are trying to offer an alternative to Kais Saied and are calling for a national dialogue in order to deal with these problems that you have talked about. And I completely agree. Economic reforms will not take place within this authoritarian backsliding that's happening in Tunisia. And everybody needs to realize that Kais Saied cannot be the solution. He is the problem. He is only making the problems worse. And his only solution is every day to find imaginary enemies, whether it is the opposition or foreign migrants, Black Africans in Tunisia, or foreign plots. He keeps repeating the same myths, and he has nothing to offer to the real problems that Tunisians are facing. We are seeing unprecedented problems, shortage of goods, high inflation, and this is reflected also in the increase in migration, which seems to be what some nations are only interested in. But they should realize that it's Kais Saied's destruction of Tunisia's democracy that is leading to this despair, and he is only exacerbating the problems that is making Tunisia unstable and a problem for itself and its people and for its partners.
Ellie, very quickly, because we're almost out of time on the show, what can Europe do here? Is this to some extent a fault of the West? Because normally when the West has a person that we will put a quotation mark around, but has a dictator in their midst, they generally start with sanctions and they start with the hectoring. They've been very silent on Tunisia.
Yes, I think that Europe and the West in general, they missed an opportunity in 2011. They should have set up the same, support mechanism that was set up for Eastern Europe back then in 1990 after the fall of the Soviet Union. They decided in 2011, they decided to take another route. And I think now they're realizing that the consequences of this lightweight support are detrimental to Europe itself and to their own interest.
I'm afraid, Eli, that we are running out of time. The show is almost over, but it's been a pleasure having you, Eli, on the show. Tarek, Yusra, all three of you, thank you very much for agreeing to come on. And my best wishes to your father, Yusra. Remember, you can see more discussion and debate on our YouTube channel. If you head over there, just go to YouTube, search for Roundtable TRT World. But for now, from me here and the entire team, thank you for watching and goodbye.